We affirm contention 1 is treating Americans in the status quo. Drug prices are skyrocketing and patients are suffering. According to a U.S. Senate report this year, the price of the most prescribed drugs has increased by 12% every year for the last 5 years, 10 times the rate of inflation. The resulting problem is huge. According to Brenza 17, 1 in 7 Americans don't fill their prescriptions because of cost. Price control is solved by capping the prices of drugs. According to FRACT 15, in EU countries, price controls led to a decrease in cost of up to 24%. Empirically, price controls increase prescription adherence. Stephen Morgan from the University of British Columbia finds in 2016 that while the US has the highest global cost-related non-adherence by a wide margin, it could be lowered substantially. Non-adherence was 4 times lower in countries that had implemented price controls. The impact of increased prescription adherence is saving lives. The New York Times explained in 2017, failure to take prescribed medications causes approximately 125,000 deaths annually in the US. Condition 2 is better solutions. According to Wapner from Newsweek in 2018, because raising pharmaceutical prices is legal and unlimited, it has become standard practice for American companies seeking to gain profit. Therefore, companies will know that they will always be able to create additional revenue. This is translated into corporate short-termism, meaning pharma executives avoid large outlays and risk because the current price hiking strategy is foolproof. In fact, according to Kana from IQVIA 17, 3/4 of pharmaceutical executives want structural changes to lead to profits within 1 year. This has stopped all long-term reform, as Banner 09 confirms that pharma companies have only had sporadic, ad hoc projects to reduce their costs, and few have committed to wholesale structural change aimed at reducing their cost bases. One such change is outsourcing, where a pharmaceutical company shifts production or research to overseas locations and collaborators. Because it takes time to recoup upfront cost, it takes around 3 years for outsourcing to turn a profit. Eventually, though, it does lead to large cost savings, as Lahiri from the Economic Times 08 finds that multinational corporations can save 25 to 40% of their costs by offshoring drug making and other parts of pharma research. Still, because of short-termism, Kana 17 finds that outsourcing in pharma lags behind other industries. Affirm because implementing price controls would force a strategic readjustment. Pharma companies would no longer be able to generate revenues by increasing the prices of their drugs. Following European price controls, Eager 14 writes that reducing development costs was necessary and outsourcing was an efficient model to do so. In fact, Kana 17 concludes that disruptive change is a key driver in the adoption of outsourcing. Sullivan 18 spells out the link when he says that if pharmaceutical price controls don't allow continued domestic revenue growth, it is likely that companies leave the US. In particular, pharma companies will move to developing countries, as A.T. Kearney finds that wage costs in developing countries are between 1/5 and 1/10 of US cost, which is why 9 of the top 10 destinations for outsourcing are developing countries. Therefore, the impact is increasing innovation in the developing world. According to Bate 08, in developing nations, local production of pharmaceuticals would provide local jobs, increase expertise, and cut dependence on foreign suppliers. It will also help the nations achieve economic autonomy and development. The combination of economic prosperity and infrastructure investments creates an environment that generates homegrown innovations. According to Boring 12, as a result of FDI from pharmaceutical multinational firms going into manufacturing and R&D, Ireland was able to develop its own biopharmaceutical industry. She says the same process could occur next in China, Malaysia, India, and Latin America. Developing drugs in these countries will save lives by curing diseases, as according to the Kaiser Foundation in 2018, more than 1 billion people in low and middle income countries are infected with neglected tropical diseases, or NTDs. Each year, about 185,000 people die as a result. Overall, the health impact of NTDs negatively affects economic development, educational achievement, and reduces agricultural productivity. Affirming solves as the countries affected by tropical diseases will be the ones conducting the research. According to Holtz 12, because they would be incentivized to research diseases that affect their own citizens. After pharmaceutical sector expansion, countries in economic transition are uniquely poised to be leaders in providing access to medicines for NTDs. Thus, we affirm.
Because price controls are a prescription for disaster, LB9 negate to resolve the United States federal government should impose price controls on the pharmaceutical industry. Our sole point of contention is protecting the most vulnerable. Currently, Freeman and Hill finds in 2017 the private sector is stabilizing drug prices in the long term without losing profits. Technological advancements, competition, and diagnostic improvements ensure that prices are stabilizing right now. Sullivan and Policyman corroborates in 2018, the final cost of prescription paid by consumers have declined by 17%. The industry works both to produce the new drug and keep them affordable for consumers domestically and abroad, protecting poorer parts of the population who disproportionately face chronic illnesses and have difficulty affording medication. Unfortunately, price controls cut profit margin, destroying the industry, stopping the progress from being made. Specifically, Durham Corporation in 2008 argues that if the United States implemented price controls similar to other developing countries, pharmaceutical revenue falls by 20%. This has two consequences. First, reducing accessibility. Currently, pharmaceutical companies and investors divert profits to low-income countries across the world in order to assist overall affordability and build up developing industries in the long term. Because of this, Health Affairs Stewart Streicher in 2011 explains that in developing countries, costs are 20% less than in the United States. Yadav of the UK Department for International Development in 2010 explains that this strategy increases global access to drugs by 4 to 7 times. Unfortunately, this practice does not garner any profit in the short term, meaning it would be the first thing cut if price controls were implemented as investors pull out of the market. Yadav continues, in order for the strategy to work, there needs to be robust revenue flows to give investors the key confidence to enter these developing markets. Slash revenue from price controls present key barriers to limiting widespread access. For example, in the UK government, when they controlled prices, it was no longer feasible for British companies to enter poorer European states, and they exited those markets. Thus, Yadav concludes, setting a price reduces access from 90% of the population to less than 30% of the population. The second consequence is shrinking research and development. High initial prices are necessary for firms to have a positive return on investment for producing new drugs, since searches for new cures are so risky to undertake. This fosters a competitive environment for small businesses. Shepard of the Journal of Healthcare and Law Policy explains in 2010 that smaller companies are much more equipped to innovate since the smaller size makes them more flexible, connected to academic institutions, and have a greater capacity to absorb risk. As such, 2/3 of all new drugs originate from smaller biotech firms. This goes away in a world with price controls. Price controls disproportionately hurt small businesses since they cannot fall back on the large amount of capital like larger companies. Geddes of the American Action Forum corroborates in 2015, a 10% increase in regulatory costs puts 6% of small businesses out of business, translating to 400 small businesses in an industry. This has happened before. Using data from India, Dean of Rollins School of Public Health quantifies in 2018, under price controls, small local manufacturers saw a 14% decrease in market share. Overall, Abbott of Managerial Decision Economics quantifies it in 2007. A price reduction by 40% leads to 60% fewer R&D expenditures undertaken. This is disastrous. Research and development helps the world's poor. Standing of the Fortune reports in 2018, U.S. market funds half the world's medical research and development. Lanzhou, UC Berkeley explains in 2005, that drug companies target half of research and development to developing markets, but requires large amounts of excess revenue, since PhD chemist Dr. David Taylor in his 2015 book notes that none of the drug developments in the developing world are profitable. Maintaining high revenue is vital and historically results in relief. Du Bois of Toulouse School of Economics quantifies in 2014, a 1% increase in revenue leads to a 3% increase in the number of marketed vaccines in the developing world, which according to Lamb of Atlantic in 2015, have prevented 500 million children from dying in the developing world. Because we protect the most vulnerable, we're proud to negate.
I don't know if it's the common evidence, it's that price controls will lead to outsourcing.
Can I flash it too?
Sure. I have a USB-C though. Weird man. We can take our time too.
Yeah, can we take our time?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Alright, what's going on?
I literally don't know how to turn it off, so I'll just leave.
You just leave the thing outside.
Sorry about that, guys.
That's okay.
So you can scroll between screens. So here's the Kana link about disruptive change. Then there's one specific person.
So this one just here?
Yeah, and then you can like scroll this way.
Okay, sorry.
Is there a definition for disruptive change?
That'd be great. It's about regulatory pressure.
Alright, I'm good. Alright, so in your second contention, you talk about small businesses, how there's competition right now, right? So small businesses are usually bought out by the big companies, right? So when you decrease the profits of the big companies, like don't you just decrease the avenues in which these big companies can acquire these small companies and increase their
I would
profits?
argue if you threaten their profit margins, it probably gives them more of an incentive to consolidate the industry, because we all agree that merger and acquisitions probably
Hold on.
makes a large monopoly money,
Yeah.
which is why if you place economic stress on them,
Right.
like in
Yeah, I
2008, they
understand.
increased
Hold
mergers
on.
and acquisitions.
Hold up. Let's say they increase mergers and acquisitions. What is their ultimate goal of having these mergers?
I mean, like,
to increase their profits,
it's
right?
dependent, like, on the monopoly, right? Like, it's usually to increase profits, yeah.
Right. So after you
So-
cut profits or you place a price cap on these profits, that decreases the incentive for big companies to merge with, or for small companies to, for big
yeah.
companies to acquire these small
If they
companies. right?
can't make as much money because there's a price control,
Yeah.
it gives them more of an incentive to chase revenue by merging and acquiring with other
Wait,
companies.
no, hold up.
That's
but
the argument.
ultimate revenue
Can I
that
ask
they
you a
get,
question?
even after they merge,
Look,
is still
we
stunted
can
when you have a price
we can have
control.
clashing warrants, but like I would say in 2008,
Sure.
when there was an economic recession and there was economic pressure, mergers and acquisitions increased by 13%. You should prefer historical analysis.
Yeah,
here.
but it's
I'm gonna
different
ask you a
because there were
question.
no price controls. But
That's
go ahead.
fine, okay.
Yeah,
Your second contention.
Mhm.
Are you saying that outsourcing to other markets happens because of price controls?
correct.
Okay, so why is that good?
Right. Well, here he explains very clearly, you decrease costs by 25 to 40%, but moreover,
Wait,
having
25 to 40% of what?
they just decrease their costs,
What
like
costs?
manufacturing costs, like all these
Oh,
other
okay,
costs
so
that
they're
they-
exploiting these markets, paying them less.
No,
Like, what's happening?
right? I would say first of all, they're not really exploiting them. They just
Okay.
have lower wages in these other countries because comparatively the
Wait,
two
what?
two countries are very different, right?
Okay, sure. So you're saying the manufacturing.
like we're paying
so
them
you're
a lot
saying-
less.
So you're
It's
saying
not like
outsourcing
that.
into other countries is good.
Correct, right?
Why does that
But
lead to
also,
R&D? You just told me it's manufacturing processes
It's
in those
manufacturing
other
other
countries.
parts of
Where
our
does the
research.
R&D happen?
in the pharma companies, and we're manufacturing,
Yeah.
and we're offshoring parts
Yeah,
of the
like Nike designs the shoe in the U.S., then they send it to Philippines to make the shoe. Why is R&D going to
hold on.
other countries?
It's not just manufacturing though. It's also other sectors of
You
pharma
just
research.
told me it was manufacturing.
I didn't just
You
say
say
it was
they
manufacturing.
decrease costs because they pay these workers less in their manufacturing
no,
process.
okay.
I would say it makes a lot more
Here,
sense.
let
Innovation,
me respond real quick. All right.
like, this is, okay, you
Andrew,
just spoke.
Andrew.
I should make this argument first. That's fine. The
Go
Shepherd
ahead,
card
go
tells you that
ahead.
2/3 of all new drugs come from small businesses
Yeah.
in the United States.
I would
And
say
it
small
also makes
businesses get
sense
worse.
that innovation happens in the United States better, other than these developing countries, which you don't even tell me where
It's
they
not
are.
that we're not creating more drugs there. We're offshoring other parts of pharma research, not
Okay,
just
sure,
manufacturing,
that's fine.
which creates a
Can you-
pharmaceutical
can you
sector
give me an
in these
example of
countries.
this?
Ireland, according
So
to
they
412.
offshore to Ireland, which is
Correct.
not a developing country.
Right. It used to be a farm.
Can you
no
give me-
offense to anyone, please, but it used to be not a very developed country
Okay.
at all, and
So-
foreign FDI went in, and that's what created the pharmaceutical sector. The same thing's going to happen in other countries.
Okay.
We're running out of points at a good time.
Starting now.
We good? Nice and top down. The link that my opponent's case is entirely contingent upon is the idea that when you implement a price control, the profits of these companies goes down. They are only talking about revenue in their evidence though, which is really problematic for them. The only evidence they have providing you that this could possibly be true is Sue said there's a 20% decrease in revenue, but they don't account for the decrease in cost that comes after offshoring takes place. What we tell you is after a link occurs and companies begin to offshore to other countries, Lahiri says that they save 25 to 40% of their spending. That overwhelms their link. There is a greater decrease in cost than decrease in profit, meaning that in the long run, profits stay the same. That is going to take out both of their links. They have no offense in the round. But go further. Their first link is about access. The first response, again, is that profit doesn't decrease, so there won't ever be any decrease in access in other countries. They never have to boost prices elsewhere. But second, our case prereqs this in a second way, because we tell you specifically from Bait OH that when local production begins in these other countries, it increases the number of corporations beginning there, and it decreases the reliance on foreign markets. So that means that as our outsourcing link begins to take place, their link is going to become less and less important. Having these donated or cheaper drugs elsewhere becomes less and less important. And the final response is a clean takeout. Even if you're not buying our case, you're still buying this takeout because companies are always going to be profit motivated. The reason that that matters is because right now, what they're doing in developing countries, providing cheaper prices there, is the profit maximizing idea. They have found the price that maximizes profits in developing countries. It does happen to be cheaper than it is in the United States, but it still is the one that generates the most profits. That means there's nowhere to go. Increasing prices would not increase their revenue. They're not generating more money. Flynn makes this very clear from American University. He says that if we increase the price, there's going to be a decrease in access because people in Africa and Asia and these developing countries simply can't afford higher priced drugs. That's why if you vote for them, nothing is going to change in these developing countries. You're going to see the same amount of price no matter what. There's never going to be an increase because it would lead to decrease in profits. On to their second link. They're trying to tell you that there's going to be a decrease in research and development as small businesses are hurt by price controls. Realize that they don't actually understand the link of how small businesses create R&D in the long run. What actually happens, as Andrew concedes in Crossfire, is that a large business goes in, and after a small business has a hint or has started to create a new molecular entity, they go and buy that company and consolidate. This is a few implications in the round. First, it means that there's no decreasing incentive for these small businesses to generate R&D. But second, it means that there's going to be increasing consolidation in the negative world and the affirmative world, and that's really problematic. If consolidation continues, we're just going to see increasing problems of increasing drug prices in the entire world. That's why Brecht finds that implementing a price control would decrease monopolies 37%. So we need to decrease this consolidation by affirming. Finally, if you want to look at their evidence where they're telling you there's these decreasing small businesses after price controls are implemented, what actually takes place is very different. In fact, when we look at India, for example, they give you this India example, these aren't innovative companies. It's looking at generic manufacturers. So like literally their evidence doesn't make any sense. So there's no evidence about innovative companies in this entire contention. But the real way that innovation happens in the entire world is because of public spending in the United States. And this is the most important link to innovation. It's going to be the public. According to Baker, for the Center for Economic Policy Research in 2013, effective price controls would save the government hundreds of billions of dollars for the next decade because they wouldn't have to spend as much money on pharmaceuticals, which is in the Medicare and Medicaid system. Prices would go down by billions of dollars. That money is going to be reinvested into NIH. Hopkins from UChicago says the government would step up funding to public research to save innovation. And McCarty confirms in 2018, saying the most recent price control bill included tens of billions of dollars of additional funding for the NIH annually. That's really important because public funding does two things. First, it's the real basis of innovation. Mazzucato from the LA Times says that 75% of innovative drugs come from the public sector. But second, it's much better at solving for the developing world problems. The Kaiser Foundation says in 2018 that the United States public sector system has recommitted its goal to stopping NTDs while the private sector simply has not. For that reason, we urge you to affirm.
their rebuttal. They say offshoring is going to reduce costs, which is going to increase profit, but this doesn't make any sense for two reasons. First, if they can make higher profits, there's no reason why they're not doing it right now. It's non-unique to a world of price controls. But secondly, having high revenue and high profit is a prerequisite before you can offshore, because it's very expensive to move all of your infrastructure from the United States and go to the developing world in the first place. That's why you have to look at the immediate revenue lost first before you can even implore the idea that their link and their impact happen. Let's go to our first argument on accessibility. They say that dependency is bad and we're going to be building up companies with offshoring. But our argument isn't about free handouts and donations. It's about investment into the developing world, but the profit that the investors make come from the United States. This is already happening right now, so our warrant outweighs on probability insofar as they're already building up the industry in the developing world in order to allow it to happen. If you slash their revenues, that's what risks the current status quo fixing it. But secondly, they say that profit is being maximized in the developing world because of this affordability scheme, and they read the Flynn evidence. The problem is, the Flynn evidence concludes that this is because of excess profit, because of the high income inequality in the developing world. The rich have a lot more money than the poor, which means they aren't making profits, because if you slash their revenue, then they just charge prices to the rich who have a lot more money to recoup investment off of them, rather than charging the low humanitarian price that doesn't make them money. Then on small businesses, they say there's going to be an increase in consolidation because now they want to buy, because now they want the capacity to buy mergers and acquisitions. But the problem is the Brecky evidence is talking about Norway. If you look to the United States, it doesn't make any sense, because if the revenues are slashed, of course they're going to want to buy out more smaller companies, because now they want to have a higher stake in market share because they can't make as much revenue. This empirically happened in 2008 when the economic recession happened and their revenues were cut. They increased mergers and acquisitions by 13%. Then they say public sector innovation is going to be the best type of innovation. Three key issues here. First of all, they're assuming the government is going to be pro-spending, but given the stance of our government right now, they're really not into increasing government spending. But secondly, the public sector innovation is just the most basic research of creating the molecule. It's not the development, which is where the majority of the cost is entailed, especially with things like small businesses. They never prove that public sector funds go to small businesses in the first place. But then thirdly, remember, this is the public sector of the United States, so they probably don't have the best interest of the developing world tropical diseases to fund in the first place, which don't help their constituents, which is why small businesses are the most important link into innovation. Let's go on to their case. You're preferring impact to the developing world for two reasons. First, on scope. Rather than impacting to 125,000 Americans, for the 500 million children in the developing world that have been cured. But secondly, on magnitude, because 70% of costs in the developing world for buying prescription drugs are out of pocket, so they're taking a lot more and have to take a lot harder choices. But on their first contention anyway, it doesn't matter because it doesn't fit under the weighing overview, but already prices in the United States are decreasing by 17% right now, so there really isn't uniqueness here. But then on their second intention about outsourcing, there are so many problems with this. First of all, it concedes that they're going to price gouge in the developing world, which means they're trading off higher prices in the United States and conceding our first argument on accessibility, because now they have to make profits up in the developing world by charging higher prices. That's a bad thing because you're exploiting those people. But then secondly, they're assuming that offshoring means you're going to offshore the entire innovation sector, and they give the example of Ireland. Ireland is a relatively high-income country that has a large capacity for infrastructure, but countries like Rwanda, where the tropical diseases are happening, don't have the infrastructure to create this research and development. The United States is the largest market for research and development in the first place, so there's no reason why the innovation sector is going to outsource in the first place. But thirdly, you can turn the argument against them, because if you slash their revenues immediately, they don't have the capacity to afford building up the infrastructure in the first place, and the key link here is investment in it, because if you don't have investors to transition them from the United States to the developing world, then you have no capacity for revenue. If there are price controls in the industry, investors are the ones who are scared, specifically private investors that actually care about places like the developing world, which is why you're not going to be seeing the outsourcing happen in the first place. So for all of these reasons, we are incredibly proud to negate. Yeah.
Use your time.
Okay, cool.
So in response to Lahiri about offshoring decreasing costs, you say that companies are profit maximizing. They would have decreased costs already if they had to. And then,
If they had to, yeah.
and then in your first link, you say they're not profit maximizing. They're doing a humanitarian price. So which
Yeah.
one is it? Are they profit maximizing or are they not?
It's not a contradiction. It's if your argument was true, it would already be happening right now. But it's not.
So
because
if
it
your
doesn't make
argument's
any
true, it would
sense.
be already happening right now.
Like right
Like-
now,
like
the
both-
developing world only pays 6% of the United States. So I would say that's an empirical example of us basically giving you the probability of our argument manifesting is 100% insofar it's happening right now. Your argument, not only do you have to go through this idea that companies don't know that they can make profit right now, but with the price control, suddenly they're going to find out this cool thing called outsourcing. It doesn't make a lot of sense, given that you're assuming these companies really don't have the
So
ability
we
to
did
realize
think
they
that
can
one through
lower
while we were
costs.
writing it, right? We give you the Kana evidence that explains that companies are short-termist right now. They only look to things that are going to bring them immediate profits within 1 year. Other than that, they say, you know what, I don't need to do that because I can just increase the price of
Does
drugs.
that really make a lot of sense for the
Yeah.
pharmaceutical industry, though, given the entire basic premise of the pharmaceutical industry is long-term investment to process through drugs?
No, it's
Give
to
me-
process through drugs, but it isn't to decrease costs.
That's
I
such
mean,
a long,
the Boehner
like, that's
evidence,
a long, like, why are they short-term?
why are they short-term?
Yeah.
Because the Wagner evidence says that their first tactic to increase prices to increase the price of drugs. They don't have to do anything difficult. They don't have to do any high outlays that involve risk.
That's not my question. My
It's
question
risk-
is,
it's risk
why are
avoidance.
they short-term?
It's risk
Like,
avoidance.
why would any company that wants to make money in the future only look at, like, oh, how can I make profit right now? Like, by that logic, I really don't think they'd be in business, because that probably sounds like a bad business strategy.
so I'd say
Yet they
two
are a
things.
huge business.
So I'd say two things. So first, at the warrant level, it's
Okay.
just this idea that they're risk adverse. They have this risk-free way to increase revenue. They'd prefer to do that than the risky offshoring. But second, it's confirmed empirically. You didn't
So
respond
offshoring
to the,
is risky then,
to the
right?
Gates evidence that says, the Eager evidence that says
Wait,
that after
so wait,
European price controls,
clarify.
offshoring occurred
Offshoring is
massively.
very risky.
It has more risk than the risk-free version in your world, where there's increased prices
So
with no
offshoring is
repercussions.
risky probably because it's very expensive, right?
Yeah, it's expensive for the first
So-
3 years, then we tell you it generates profits.
So if you slash their revenues in the short term, how can we expect them to have the capacity to do something like that?
I mean,
and
they have
literally
bank accounts,
develop the developing world with infrastructure to
No.
create things like research and
They
development.
have a bank account. They're making 40% profit. These are multi-billion-dollar, tens of billions of dollars.
Okay, so then why aren't they doing it right now?
Because they're short-term risk and risk averse. Like, it's kind of circular.
So your argument is businesses are
I
stupid,
have
so
a
they don't
question.
understand how to offshore.
I have a question about your
That really
model,
doesn't seem like a strong link, but yeah, you
just so
can
we're
ask me
not
a
going in
question.
circles. So why does our case concede price gouging?
Because you're saying they're moving the developing world to recoup investment.
No, they're
Which
moving
is
to the
the whole
developing world to
argument.
decrease manufacturing and research and development.
What does the
costs.
developing world have that decreases manufacturing costs?
Lower labor.
Oh, so
prices.
we're exploiting their
No,
labor
it,
now.
I mean, it costs less to live in a developing country than it does in the United States, so you get paid less, but we're
So-
not paying them less than the market wage.
Wait, you just said cheaper labor.
We're giving
That's-
people jobs
that's
who
less
otherwise
than
might
the
not have
market
jobs
wage.
at the market wage.
So
It's less than the market wage in the United
sounds like it's
States, but
pretty
not in China
exploited.
and India.
and it sounds like it's kind of tenuous. But
Uh,
we're out of time.
Alright, we have 55 left.
I'm gonna start writing that now. Right, that's correct.
Alright, so. Alright, we're gonna start on our second contention. Let's see. And we're gonna go over to. There it is. Alright, everyone good? Let's start off on our first responses to our second contention. The first of all is that they're saying we're exploiting people, but we really aren't. We're moving pharmaceutical sectors over, not just manufacturing, but also innovative sectors over to create jobs and businesses in there. What's really important is that Boring explains that when you increase local production, you decrease dependence on foreign drugs, and you also increase sustainable development in these nations. That's a prereq, and that always my opponent's arguments about giving lower priced drugs, because we're actually creating the investment, we're creating a pharmaceutical sector in these countries that's going to be a long-term benefit, not just like having them rely on the United States drugs. But second of all, what's really important is Lahiri completely takes out my opponent's case. He explains that there's a 25 to 40% decrease in cost after you outsure. My opponents have two responses. The first of all is that if they could, they would just do it right now. However, we explained very clearly from Kana that 3/4 of pharmaceutical executives want profits within 1 year, which is exactly why they're short-termists. That's the reason why in the status quo you can just hike prices however high you want. But when you have price controls, you actually make sure that they cannot hike the prices, which is why they have to do it long-term and they have to actually outsource. The same thing happened in the European countries, which is why Eager finds that empirically outsourcing occurred. But now that gives us, that completely takes out their two warrants about why revenue decreases at the point where costs offset this, any decrease in revenue after 3 years. But now, let's look to the public turn. This is the way we're getting offense on this round. Remember, we tell you first of all, on small businesses, the public, Baker explains that the government spends a lot less money on buying drugs from the pharmaceutical sector when there are price controls. That's really important because you save hundreds of billions of dollars, and Hopkins explains that they reinvest this money into the NIH funding. But third of all, McCarty explains that the probability is in the empirics. Price control proposals have increased public spending, every single one of them in the past. At the end of the day, the public is better for two reasons. The first of all is because Matsukato explains that 75% of the most innovative drugs are from the public sector, which means that whenever you increase public spending, you're increasing breakthroughs. But second of all, the World Health Organization explains that 81% of the cures for NTDs, those neglected tropical diseases, came from the public sector. Whenever you increase public, they value people over profits, which is why at the end of the day, you're still voting for the developing world, you're still voting F.
Can we see these 8% of NTD drugs in the public sector?
Take it back.
Okay. We're gonna keep on prep.
I'll take a look. I'm going to start on the weighing overview on the top of the case. Then I'll go take a second. I'll tell you where I'm going after that. Everyone's good? Start on their case, they don't respond to the weighing overview, preferring the developing world first. If they don't win the developing world, they don't win this argument. But then there's 3 reasons why they don't access their case. I would, on the second contention, we would say it's non-unique. A company is very smart. They're just saying that these are very, these investors are very short-termist. Even if they're short-termist, if they know that manufacturing process decreasing, it's like offshoring is going to decrease their manufacturing cost the most, they would have done so already. It would happen in a neg world anyways. But secondly, you need high profits to functionalize offshoring because you have to pay for all the paperwork in the first place. Insofar as they say they decrease revenue, they can't afford the offshoring. But thirdly, they don't give you the comparative analysis on who has the human capital to do the R&D. I would say in the developing world, they don't have the human capital because they don't have the same economic, the same educational institutions that the United States does, which is why R&D is always going to be preferable in the US. Go to our case. They don't respond to the uniqueness evidence on our first warrant. We tell you, Schweitzer tells you that right now, 20% of the developing world costs, drugs in the developing world cost 20% less, and Yadav explains that this tier pricing has increased access 4 to 7 times. The status quo is the most probable. We're telling you our solution is clearly working right now. They just say that this is tier pricing is used to maximize profit, but that's not true. We tell you if you increase the cost, if you increase price controls, that decreases the investors' confidence, which is why they have to pull out of the industry. We say that in the UK, because the investors pull out, the industry had to downsize and they pulled out of the developing world, such as poor European countries. But then we tell you they price gouge anyways because the Flynn evidence concludes that when you decrease the profit margin, they just price gouge the wealthy, which is why you decrease access from 90% of the population to 30% of the population as the biggest magnitude in the round. But then our second warrant on small businesses is a way you can vote for us as well. They just say that the public sector is going to fund this innovation. We tell you they only fund the most basic trials of innovation, such as clinical trials. The distribution and the small business innovation is still different from that, which is why the same card that they read about 73% still also concedes the private sector is crucially important to bring drugs to the market. Which is why we tell you when you implement price controls, you put 400 small businesses out of business, putting into harm all of the R&D that we talk about. That means that 500 million children are put at risk in their world.
Yeah.
So how much does it cost to do the paperwork, as Andrew says, to offshore?
It's not paperwork, it's moving infrastructure and building up their entire market has such an incredible cost.
Right, it's risky. So they're not doing it right now.
But
Those are high
our
upfront.
argument is if you slash their revenue more, they won't even have the capacity to even ponder.
Wait,
Your argument assumes like price controls won't reduce their revenue initially and then they'll just magically move over there with what money.
You guys frontline in summary by saying that like 3/4 of the investors are like short-term mindset, right?
3/4 of the executives.
So like they just don't know that offshoring is cost efficient.
Well, right. So what's really important is Kana. She explains that right now in the status quo, when we don't have price controls, whenever companies see a decrease in profits, they just raise their prices by like $1, $2, right?
Right, but
To
like
offset any
you
decrease in
tell
revenue.
me at the top of your rebuttal that offshoring is always profitable because it decreases manufacturing costs.
It decreases
Are you just
manufacturing
saying that like
costs after 3
you found
years.
this information but these like
No, it
investors
takes-
don't?
right,
No,
and
they know. But
Okay,
the thing
okay.
is, they have this second option. So basically what they're doing is they're choosing between two ways to increase profit. Either they're increasing prices or they're offshoring. Because like they're gonna
Why-
choose right now.
Wait,
what the evidence
what's
tells
stopping
you
them from doing both?
is the high risk and upfront
Wait,
cost.
so does a
They don't
business
want to have
want to
anything
make
that
profit?
might risk their business.
Does the business want to make profit?
Yes, but
Okay,
they
so
want to
they
do it
always
in the
want to
least
make
risky
profit.
way. That's actually really important. They
Why
want
can't
to make
decrease
profit in the
development
least
costs
risky
and
way.
then still price gouge to make money?
They price
After
gouge.
you price control,
Like, why are
then
they
they
mutually
can't price
exclusive?
gouge, which means that they can
No,
only
in the
do
developing
offshore.
world where there aren't price controls.
They don't. There's no decrease in
why they're
profit, so they don't have
moving
any I mean, you guys agree that every single impact you read in the round is contingent on winning the
You
link
say
that
in the
profits go
long
down.
term, profits will be fine.
Yeah.
But our argument short circuits yours because if they don't have the capacity to even functionalize the shift, but more importantly, if they don't even have the investors on their
I mean, they
side,
did it in the
then there's
EU.
no
Yeah.
way for them to do it.
Right, Sharon extends eager, who
You
says that
extend
they,
the example of the EU moving to
Yeah.
like Ireland. Ireland is a high income
It's-
country.
no, those are two different pieces of evidence. I don't want
You saying-
anyone to
you
get
saying-
that confused.
Okay, so what's
So
the other
in the
example?
50s,
Can you give me another example?
In the 1950s.
Yes, in the 1950s, companies moved to Ireland and created a pharmaceutical sector. That's just like an example. It's free.
Globalization,
But
during the period of
in-
globalization, we moved to Ireland.
Like, the important part though is this
I mean,
idea
like,
that
that's not
after
very good evidence.
Andrew, after price controls were implemented in the European Union in the 80s and the 90s and the noughts, what happened was we saw offshoring to China and India and Malaysia. These are
Okay.
developing countries.
So
and what
where
we're
are
seeing
NTDs located?
in those developing countries.
In China?
Yeah, PORT
I'm from China.
is specific to China, Malaysia, Singapore, South
Okay, there's a
Africa.
difference between a third world country and a developing country that already has industry and manufacturing processes.
But they also have
right?
NTDs.
NTDs happens in the third world.
No.
There's a clear distinction.
No, I
Like,
mean-
you guys give me the example of Ireland, and then like you don't show me a card against China.
Ireland is based off of having a pharmaceutical. We created a
It's,
pharmaceutical
just,
sector.
right. It's an example of how it can occur, but Boring does go on to say, and we do read in case, that the same process could be set to occur in China and India and Malaysia.
Okay. Let me see that before.
Do you want to see that part?
Yeah, they moved to China
Yeah.
and Malaysia.
Or wait, do you want to see that after my final?
Sure, sure.
It's like efficient prep allocation. Alrighty. Is everyone ready? So when you're evaluating who is best helping people in the developing world, we're comparing these two worlds. The negative is advocating for the status quo, while we want to implement price controls to increase access globally. My opponents come up here and they talk about how great the status quo is, how we're continuing innovation, or we're granting people these things in other countries, but that's contingent on a change. If the status quo isn't changing, the benefits don't matter, right? My opponent's entire link is contingent on this idea that when you implement a price control, the profits of the companies are going to go down in the long run, leading to first, like, price gouging in other countries, and second, decreasing R&D. This initial link is not going to occur because of outsourcing. What's going to happen is that as companies realize that they can do this and they're forced to do this, they're going to begin to offshore and move to other developing countries. Like here he tells you that's going to decrease their cost structures 25 to 40%. They have two responses. Their first is that if they have higher profit possible, they'd be doing it right now. The two responses are very clear. First, my opponents themselves tell you that these companies aren't always profit maximizing. And second, we tell you they're short-termist. This involves risk to move it across, and right now they just choose to always hike prices. They don't go to the secondary option of offshoring. So we are going to see it occurring. Their second response is that high profits are required. But realize these companies already have a lot of money invested, and they have a lot of money in their bank account, and we saw it in the European Union. Eager says that after price controls are implemented, companies offshore. At the end of the day, my opponents don't have any link into their round. But we have two ways that price controls are helping the developing world. First, we tell you that when you outsource, you create nascent, innovative industries within these countries. According to Boring, foreign FDI creates these new pharmaceutical industries that are going to solve diseases like NTDs that kill 185,000 people a year. But second, we tell you about the public spending. Baker says we're going to save hundreds of billions of dollars and reinvest that money back into the public sector. And a lot of that money is going to go into innovative diseases and NTDs. My opponents try to tell you this is basic research, but the WHO evidence about NTDs is specific that it's completely drugs created by the public sector. So they might do a lot of basic research, but they also do create drugs. At the end of the day, you're voting for offshoring and you're voting for the public sector as a reason to implement price controls today and save lives globally. Yeah. Cool.
So the different examples are different paragraphs that I can scroll through.
Okay, cool.
So this one is about China, Singapore, Malaysia, and then little thing with you.
Is everyone ready? Okay, gonna be the same order as Andrew summary, starting on their second contention. Or actually, the overview thing, just touch on it briefly. The person who wins this debate impacts the developing world most like best. That's what's going to be the framework for the round. Let's go to their solvency for this is on offshoring, but this link is incredibly tenuous. They say that the companies are short term, but that doesn't matter. The investors are the one who functionalized the shift into offshoring in the first place. No one is going to invest in this huge move to put all of their infrastructure from the United States in research and development to the developing world that lacks the capital. That's why our link on the short-term decrease in revenue short circuits their argument from happening in the first place, because if they lack the capacity and the investors to go to the developing world, it doesn't happen in the first place. But secondly, even if they prove they're going to offshore to lower development costs, that doesn't mean that they still can't price gouge to make more profits off of this. But thirdly, the developing world lacks the human capital to even produce research and development in the first place, because they lack these skill sets there, which means they don't even have access to their impact on research and development, even if they build up the entire industry. That's specific to the United States. So let's go to our solvency, which is our first warrant on accessibility. This outweighs their argument completely on probability already, because it's happening right now. Poorer countries only pay 20% of the United States price, and this tiered pricing system has increased access by 4 to 7 times, which means they are the only ones who risk making it worse, which means if you vote neg, you're guaranteed that this is already happening right now, which proves our warrants true. In order to functionalize the lower costs, they need to have high revenue from the United States. They aren't making profit here. If you charge a price control, that's what lowers access from 90% to 30% of the population, because now they just tier the prices to the wealthy, who are disproportionately have higher income
income than the poor in those countries. But secondly, more importantly, is on smaller businesses. They expend the public sector turn, saying that the public sector can just fund this. First of all, their evidence never says that they fund NTDs, but secondly, they haven't responded to what we said. They functionalize the most basic research. The private sector is the one that develops it for human consumption, puts it through the market, and actually distributes it in the first place, which is why we cleanly win small businesses. The initial revenue shock is what puts them out of business in the first place. You don't have the ability to research and develop from the United States, which then goes to the developing world in the first place. They don't have research and development because offshoring doesn't do that in the developing world. We're the only ones that impact the developing world of 500 million children.